In the Bad Batch finale part 1 and 2, we learned that Omega is actually older than the Bad Batch. How is this possible? While clones were created with accelerated aging, it certainly makes one wonder how she could actually be older while still looking like a child. The Bad Batch are all mutated clones, genetically modified purposely on Kamino in Nala Se's special secret laboratory. Hunter can sense electromagnetic fields, Wrecker has super strength and resilience, Crosshair has perfect aim, and Tech is a mastermind with electronics and machines. And of course Echo, who joined later, well, he's a cyborg. What's Omega's mutation? First we thought maybe she's force sensitive, then we thought maybe she can see into the future. But I think her mutation is something that really makes us understand why Kamino wants her so badly, and why she is vital to their Phase 3 clone trooper plan. And later on, once the Empire finds out about her, why she'll be extremely important to them as well. I think that her mutation is that she ages slower than a normal human being. That's really the most valuable mutation above all the rest. The ability to outlive everyone, much like Yoda. If all those abilities could be planted into a being and make them resistant to aging, they'd be a super being, perfect for someone like Sidious to transfer his essence into, unstoppable. Now, it could be that the Bad Batch aged twice as fast like all the other clones, and Omega ages normally, but that still wouldn't make much sense. I've tried to figure out the age of the Bad Batch by doing some reverse math, but I'm having a hard time, so I'll need your help in this video. I've crunched the numbers and went into some confusing math to figure out her age, under the variables that she ages half as slow as the Bad Batch, who age twice as fast relative to normal humans, or Jango Fett. So, if she doesn't age normally, then here is the breakdown for that. And if she does age normally, well, then I guess this video is kind of over. But I was thinking about it. Even if she aged normally, it doesn't really make much sense. So here we go. Here's my little breakdown. Omega said that she saw them being created, which means that she was old enough to remember that. Not to mention, she was old enough to remember being alone in that secret laboratory for many years, until they came along, as she said. I think Omega ages 400% slower than the Bad Batch, or 200% slower than a normal human being. Boba Fett was almost 14 years old during the time of the Bad Batch, 13 going on 14, making him 10 years old during Attack of the Clones when we saw him with Jango Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Meaning he was created 10 years before Attack of the Clones, so essentially he was created during the time of the Phantom Menace, when Anakin was 9. If Omega was created at the same time, in secret, only with a slower aging mutation, then she could have been born during the time of Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul's fight. Now, to segue for a second, she could have an even more rare mutation, one where she's born and she has accelerated aging up until the age of, let's say, 10 years old, so really, it only takes 5 years to get her to age 10, or even less than that perhaps. And then once she hits age 10, then it's like a slow release. She's just aging twice as slow, or 3 times as slow, or 4 times as slow as a normal human. That could also be a possibility, but I just don't think they would do something that confusing. There are just too many variables there, so I think she just ages maybe slower than everybody else. So when Palpatine discovered Anakin, it was in episode 1, and if Omega's born during the Phantom Menace, around the same time as Boba, maybe in secret, and she ages at half the speed, by the time of Attack of the Clones, which is 10 years later, she'd look like a 5-year-old, but have lived 10 years. Add another 3 years to get to the end of Revenge of the Sith and the Bad Batch, and she'd be 6, almost 7 years old physically, but have been alive for over 13 years, going on 14. If she saw the Bad Batch be created and she spent years alone by herself, let's say 5 years, that means they were created 5 years after the Phantom Menace. And I'm not throwing it out of the equation that maybe she just ages 1.5 times slower. Because she doesn't really look to be about 6 or 7 years old, she looks to be maybe 10 or 12. So if she saw the Bad Batch be created and she spent years alone by herself, let's say she spent 5 years alone, that means they were created 5 years after the Phantom Menace, because she obviously has to be old enough to remember being alone and remember wanting a brother or sister or someone there. So halfway between episode 1 and 2, this would make them 8 years old by the time of the Bad Batch, right? Because we take 5 years more to get to Attack of the Clones from the Phantom Menace, then another 3 years to get to the end of Revenge of the Sith, where they would be 8 years old, but they would look 16 years old. So again, that can't be. That doesn't really make sense. They don't look 16, they look like they're 30. So they must be born earlier than that, assuming they age twice as fast as normal and not 3 times or 4 times. So if that's the case, then they would have to be made 15 years before the Bad Batch, so That's 2 years before the Phantom Menace, and that doesn't make sense either, because that would be 2 years before Boba was born, assuming Boba was created as soon as Jango's DNA was being used. And we know Omega spent years alone until they were created, so that puts them roughly around the age of 23 at the oldest if they have accelerated aging and if they were created only 3 years after the Phantom Menace. So 3 years after the Phantom Menace, after episode 1, takes us 7 years to get to episode 2, which makes them 14 physically, add another 3 to almost 4 years to get to the end of Revenge of the Sith and in the Bad Batch, and they'd add another 6 to 8 years of physical age because we got to multiply it by 2. So that would make them about 20 to 22 years old physically. It still doesn't really make much sense considering they look to be actually quite old, but I guess so did Obi-Wan on Tatooine, so maybe war and stress does something to a man. So the math is just kind of confusing me, and I can imagine a lot of you are probably confused as well, but for anyone who is good at math here in the comments, please let me know. Like, is there some better formula that you have that can kind of let us understand when exactly Omega was born and when exactly the Bad Batch were born and how old they are? And then that way we can see if Omega is really being de-aged or if she's just a normal being. Anyways, I'd love for them to clear this up, but for now, this is all I can do to make sense of it, you know, considering with all the variables. It could very well be that Omega is just a normal being like Jango Fett, unaltered, and she just doesn't have any sort of aging at all. But if that's the case, it just doesn't really make sense because that would make her around the same age as Boba if she was born during the time of the Phantom Menace with him, to which the Bad Batch would have to be born pretty much around the same time, but then she wouldn't really remember. Like, she would be 1 or 2 years old. Unless, of course, they're creating her until she's about 5 to 6 years old, where she comes out of that pod and she's just, you know, like a toddler, or like a young kid. And all of this is assuming since Sifo-Dyas worked with Kamino sometime near the end of episode 1. Anyways, I hope I didn't confuse you too much. Let me know what you guys think about this. Please open up a dialogue. Let me understand some of the math going on here, because I don't think math is my strong suit, but if it is for you, please let me know, because I'd love to crack this a little bit and understand a little more as to how exactly she is so much younger physically, but is actually a lot older, and how much older is she compared to the Bad Batch. So I think there's some de-aging going on, and I think that's very, very vital to the plan of the Empire, and they could eventually go after her in Season 2, which will be pretty cool to see. Hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for giving me your time today in this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, remember, my fellow Jedi and Sith friends, the Force will be with you always.